US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Israel for talks with Prime Minister Netanyahu, pushing for a Gaza ceasefire plan that's been backed by the UN. Here was Antony Blinken in Israel today.
The only party that has not accepted, the only party that's not said yes, is Hamas. That's who everyone's waiting on. That's who the Palestinians in Gaza are waiting on. It's who the Israelis are waiting on. It's who the hostages and the hostage families are waiting on. It's who the entire region and the entire world is waiting on. And so we'll see. Does Hamas want to end this conflict, end this war that it started, or not?
Now, of course, this visit comes after the IDF successfully rescued 4 hostages from Gaza at the weekend. Joining me to discuss this and all the other news out of the US is former White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer. Sean, thanks for joining me. This is Blinken's 8th visit to the region since the October 7 attacks. How likely is a ceasefire agreement this time, do you think?
It's a great question, James. I think the idea of thinking that somehow a terrorist organization that has inflicted this much pain and acted so recklessly is suddenly going to come to their senses, as Blinken thinks is going to happen, is kind of nuts to begin with. We've got to remember that this idea that these folks who came into Israel on October 7th took women and children that were innocent in this conflict that didn't exist until then. And suddenly we think somehow they're going to be good actors in this conversation is crazy. And I think that's the fundamental flaw in all of this, is that we are not allowing Israel to prosecute this as they should. This was their people. Frankly, there's American citizens that are being held hostage as well. And we're acting as though this is some kind of skirmish that needs to be finalized is ridiculous. I think the reason that he keeps coming back is that they're acting as though that Hamas is some kind of pragmatic organization that's looking to a logical outcome.
And the big sticking point here, as I understand it, is that Hamas are demanding as a condition of a ceasefire that Israel agree to end the war completely. But of course, Netanyahu can't do that because he stated the elimination of Hamas completely is a major goal.
Right, but I don't think any of us should. I mean, they're a terrorist organization that went in and took hostages. And have held them and have done horrible things. This was started by Hamas. That is the one thing that Blinken got right. And the idea that we are somehow supposed to be negotiating in good faith with this organization is ridiculous. Hamas needs to understand that it right now that the eyes of the world are on it, and that all of that firepower that Israel has in it, the idea that Israel is somehow supposed to be the good actor in all this, they have a right to defend themselves and to take offensive actions as any country would who had this perpetrated upon them. And I don't understand the mentality that somehow believes that Hamas, it's a stated terrorist organization, is somehow going to come to its senses, which is what Blinken keeps referring to. So yes, this is the 8th trip, but the reason that he hasn't been successful in the previous 7th is that I think he completely fundamentally misunderstands the nature of what's happening.
So while Blinken is trying to organise a ceasefire in Gaza, the Biden administration is close to finalising a landmark defence treaty with Saudi Arabia.
Right. Well, look, I think that the thing that's, for me, obviously I'm more focused on domestic politics here, James. And it's interesting because when they came into office in January of 2020, you think about where the world was at that time. President Trump had left a world that was much more stable, an area where we were making peace agreements. And this interestingly, President Biden came into office calling people in the Middle East, countries in the Middle East, pariahs, talking about how they were gonna, reveal a certain fate among them. And yet here he is trying to patch together back a sense of peace that was there. The only thing that changed between now and then is him. You look at Israel and Hamas, what's going on in the Middle East, and so much of it is a reversal of where President Trump left this. Countries making peace, historic peace, through the Abraham Accords. And now it shouldn't be lost to anyone here in the U.S. and frankly around the world, the differences of 4 years of Trump versus 3.5 years of Biden. You can say that, maybe Biden goes to bed a lot earlier and doesn't tweet out stuff, but the world was a better and safer place under President Trump.
How important are these peace treaties in Gaza and this mutual defence treaty with an authoritarian regime in Saudi Arabia? How important is that for Biden domestically as opposed to, is it going to be good internationally?
It's an interesting question. I mean, foreign policy has rarely played into our domestic elections. However, I think it goes to an overall narrative of Biden, which is, hey, things were better under Trump. And when you can point to both domestic issues and foreign policy issues, and why that matters is that while so much of this is technically foreign policy, our taxpayers are being asked to step up and finance more, whether it's the war in Israel and Hamas, whether it's the war in Ukraine that Russia is waging, that it's taxpayers here in the United States that are being asked to finance it. And so they're looking at a foreign issue through a domestic lens. And that's what makes it, a little different, because it's not just some kind of foreign war that we're involved in diplomatically trying to find a resolution to, but we're actually being asked to finance it here. We are undermining our own national security, in my opinion, by sending so many of these munitions and different artillery shells, et cetera, overseas at a time when we are leaving the shelves barren.
Yeah, and you certainly get the idea that Biden would love to go to the presidential debates with Trump, having had a few wins internationally, to say, see, I can manage things both domestically and internationally.
Unfortunately, though, the answer's simple. Like, you created the fire and now you want credit for putting it out. Again, if I'm Trump, I say, great. In 4 years, there were no foreign wars. Hamas wasn't attacking Israel. Russia hadn't invaded any aspect of land or taken over anything or usurped anything in 4 years, for the first time since Putin had taken office. Trump can point to all over the globe being a lot more stable. What Biden can say is, yeah, I withdrew from Afghanistan. We lost 13 lives. It sent a signal throughout the world that we don't stand by our allies. And look what's happened since. And yes, in some cases, I've created a couple deals here and there. I don't think the American people would buy that. Again, the example is fairly simple. You lit a fire, and now you want credit for putting part of it out? Because, again, it wouldn't even be the whole fire.
Indeed. Let's talk about Trump quickly. He's preparing for his July sentencing after being found guilty in that hush money trial. He's scheduled to be interviewed by probation officials. That's one of the steps towards sentencing. How does that play out, Sean, and what do you expect the result to be?
James, actually, that's a really interesting question you're asking, because there's this theory here. So that, as you point out correctly, is a step that everyone who's been convicted by a jury in New York meets with a probation officer. That probation officer determines a recommendation to the judge saying, hey, here's their employment, here are their family obligations, right? I mean, in this case, it's kind of weird. Hi, this is a billionaire. He's got plenty of money. He was president of the United States. He's the leading candidate to return to office. And here's my assessment of him. So their job is to make an assessment as to what a punishment might be appropriate or would be tolerable. Do they have obligations that they need to meet in their community, their family, and maybe outstanding business that they run or are part of? So in this case, it's truly just a box that needs to be checked. Under normal circumstances, I'd say this is silly. It's a misdemeanor offense on bookkeeping charges that were well past the statute of limitations here in America. So this would be a no-brainer. I don't know where this thing plays out. Does Marchand, the judge there, actually, recommend some kind of prison time? James, I'm convinced this was never about getting Trump, because we all know, anyone who's studied any amount of American law knows that this is going to get overturned on appeal. But it won't until well after the election. I believe, and I've been saying this over and over again, this was about the moniker, the bumper sticker, the slogan, convicted felon. The Democrats have tried to hurt Trump. They tried to take him off the ballot. They tried to impeach him. They've tried to go after him in 4 different cases. They just wanted to be able to use the slogan convicted felon so that they can ask every Republican, and we see this throughout the U.S. media, will you vote for a convicted felon? What do you think now that he's a convicted felon? This was all about the latest and greatest. Remember, in 2016, it was about Russia. 2020, it was suppressing a laptop. This is the latest iteration in how they're getting Trump.
And while Trump is meeting with probation officials, Hunter Biden, the jury have retired to deliberate on the verdict regarding his gun trial, whether he's guilty of federal firearm charges, specifically of lying about his drug addiction when purchasing a weapon. How long do you think the jury will be out, and do you think they'll find him guilty, or will there be some sympathy for the drug-addicted son of the president?
I think the latter. I don't see any world that this guy gets convicted. He is in Delaware. It's a home field game, home field advantage here. Everybody knows the Bidens. It's a small city. They've been in office for a half a century doing all sorts of deals. I don't think there's any question he gets off on this. But to the first part of what you said, look at the difference. Trump, it was this connect the dots. Michael Cohen says this. Maybe this didn't happen. There's no direct proof that any of it occurred. In Hunter Biden's case, he bought the gun. That's indisputable. He signed a federal firearms application. That's indisputable. None of that, like, he doesn't dispute it. His attorney doesn't dispute it. Question 11E is, are you an active drug user? He lied on that form. There is no question about it that he was an active drug user. Why do I can say that? Because he literally said it in his own book. The prosecution played the audio of him talking in his book about how he was actively using crack. There are text messages about him looking for a drug dealer named Mookie during that time. Again, his text messages, not somebody else's, saying, here you are. Family members have testified that he was using drugs. Haley Biden, his brother's wife, who he was having a relationship with at the time, said that she saw the gun in his folder, leather sack, I guess it was, with residue of cocaine on it. Again, not disputed. None of those facts are in dispute, right? Neither by Hunter Biden, not by his attorney. And yet I still think he's going to get off.
Well, the contrast between the treatment of Donald Trump and the treatment of Hunter Biden is fascinating, and a bit more to play out in all of that. So we're watching with interest. Sean Spicer, thank you so much for your time tonight.
My pleasure. Good to see you.